Hand over your work. He barked it like I was some intern who'd been caught browsing social media during crunch time. Preston Campbell, 27 years old, standing there in my office doorway wearing $1,000 sneakers and the kind of smirk you only get when daddy signs your paychecks. The kid had a neck like a giraffe and about as much technical sense as a broken calculator trying to run machine learning algorithms. I'm Caleb Rodriguez, 51 years old, and I've been writing code since this punk was learning to tie his shoes. 18 years in software engineering, 6 of those in the Navy, writing navigation systems for destroyers that actually had to work in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. You screw up GPS coordinates when you're guiding a billion-dollar warship, people die. But apparently none of that real-world experience counts when nepotism walks through the door wearing designer cologne and speaking fluent startup nonsense. 2 weeks earlier, everything was different. I was running point on the biggest product launch in Secure Flow Financial's history. After 6 years of building our compliance platform from scratch, we were finally ready for our Series B funding round. $70 million was on the table, contingent on our regulatory software passing every audit the banks could throw at it. This wasn't some flashy consumer app that could get away with move fast and break things. This was financial infrastructure software where breaking things meant regulatory violations, massive fines, and potentially prison time for our clients. I'd coded every module myself, built the authentication system using military-grade encryption protocols I'd learned during my Navy days, designed the audit trail architecture to be bulletproof against both hackers and federal investigators, fixed every memory leak, optimized every database query, even debugged a critical race condition in our transaction processing engine at 3 a.m. on Christmas morning while my ex-wife called to complain about late child support payments. This platform wasn't just my job. It was my legacy. The thing I'd point to when I retired and say I built that, and it never failed when it mattered. But legacies don't matter much when the CEO's son shows up with his MBA from some fancy business school and zero real-world experience with systems that actually have to function under pressure. The announcement came during our monthly all-hands meeting. Shane Campbell, our CEO and Preston's daddy, went all warm and fuzzy over Zoom. His voice had that practiced corporate tone that CEOs use when they're about to screw someone over, but want to sound inspirational about it. To ensure we're moving forward with fresh perspectives for our Q3 expansion, I'm excited to announce that Preston will be joining us as strategic product lead. He brings innovative thinking and cutting-edge methodologies that will help us scale our platform for the next generation of financial technology. Strategic product lead. That's corporate speak for my son needs a job that sounds important, and I'm giving him yours. No discussion, no transition period, no acknowledgement that maybe the guy who actually built the thing should have some input on who takes it over. Just a fait accompli delivered with a smile and a lot of buzzword salad. The Slack channel exploded with congratulatory messages that nobody meant. Our senior developers started private DMs asking what the hell was happening. Logan Martinez, our CTO, sent me a message that just said, "We need to talk." After the meeting, Preston rolled into his new role like he was Steve Jobs reincarnated to revolutionize financial compliance. First thing he did was schedule a series of discovery sessions to understand our current paradigms and identify optimization opportunities. I sat through the first one listening to him butcher technical terms while our senior developers exchanged looks like they were watching a car crash in slow motion. He kept using phrases like synergistic architecture and disruptive compliance frameworks. When our database administrator tried to explain why we couldn't just migrate everything to NoSQL because relational thinking limits innovation potential, Preston nodded sagely and asked why we couldn't just use blockchain to solve our scalability issues. That's when I knew we were dealing with someone who'd learned everything he knew about technology from TED Talks and startup blogs. By day 3, he was asking me what a staging environment was and why we couldn't just test everything in production to eliminate redundant development overhead. By day 5, he wanted to know why we needed QA testing when we could just leverage user feedback loops to identify improvement vectors in real time. And by the end of his first week, he'd deleted our entire bug tracking system because, and I quote, "negative energy attracts problems, and we need to focus on solution-oriented mindsets." The guy wasn't just incompetent. He was dangerously incompetent with administrative access to systems he didn't understand. It's one thing to be ignorant, it's another thing entirely to be ignorant and convinced that your ignorance is actually innovative thinking that the rest of us are too stuck in our ways to appreciate. I started quietly documenting everything. screenshots of his changes, copies of his Slack messages, logs of every modification he made to our code base. My Navy training had taught me to always have a backup plan, because when things go sideways in the real world, paperwork and documentation are often the only things standing between you and a court-martial. Corporate America isn't that different from the military when it comes to covering your ass. The real wake-up call came when I found forged approval signatures in our system logs. I was doing my usual evening security audit, something I'd done every night for 6 years because financial compliance software doesn't get to take weekends off, when I noticed some unusual administrative activity. Someone had been escalating permissions using my digital signature, except I never approved anything. See, in the Navy, we had this thing called chain of custody for sensitive systems. Every change, every access request, every modification had to be logged, signed, and verified by multiple parties. It wasn't bureaucracy for the sake of bureaucracy. It was the difference between a navigation system that got you home safely and one that steered you into a reef at 30 knots. I'd built the same kind of audit trail into our platform. Every administrative action required cryptographic signatures from authorized personnel. My signature was tied to my personal security certificate, generated from a hardware token that never left my possession. There was literally no way for anyone else to use it without physically stealing my authentication device. But there it was in the logs, my signature authorizing Preston Campbell for root access to our production database servers, my signature approving his modification of core security protocols, my signature green-lighting changes to our backup and recovery systems, all time-stamped during hours when I was either asleep at home or sitting in meetings where Preston could see me. When I dug deeper into the metadata, the trail led straight back to Preston's workstation. The kid had somehow gotten hold of a forged copy of my digital certificate and been using it to give himself God mode access to every system in our stack. He'd been overriding security protocols I'd spent months implementing, bypassing approval workflows, and essentially turning our tightly controlled platform into his personal sandbox. That's when I stopped being annoyed and started planning. You don't spend 6 years in military communications without learning a thing or two about redundancy and fail-safes. During our early compliance testing phase, I'd built what I called a shadow backup system, a complete mirror of our production environment tucked away in an unused server partition that nobody knew about except me. It was my insurance policy against exactly this kind of scenario. While Preston was busy innovating our main codebase into a pile of digital garbage, I was quietly syncing my shadow system with every stable build we released. Every night at 2 a.m., an automated script would create an encrypted backup of our working platform and store it safely away from whatever chaos Preston might unleash during his daily optimization sessions. The guy kept making changes that would make any competent developer's skin crawl. He replaced our secure authentication modules with some open-source widgets he'd found on Reddit, claiming they had better user experience paradigms. The fact that these widgets had exactly zero security auditing and were maintained by a single developer in Moldova apparently didn't factor into his decision-making process. He scrapped the user onboarding flow I'd designed from scratch, a carefully orchestrated sequence that walked new users through every compliance requirement step by step, and substituted it with something that looked like a cross between a casino game and a social media app. Lots of flashy animations, progress bars that didn't track any actual progress, and achievement badges for completing meaningless tasks. When our QA team flagged critical security vulnerabilities in his new code, things like SQL injection vectors, unencrypted data transmissions, and authentication bypass exploits that could give attackers complete access to client financial records, Preston responded with laughing emoji and removed their access to the bug reporting system. "We're moving past negative feedback loops," he announced in the next team meeting. QA is fundamentally incompatible with agile innovation because it's based on the assumption that problems exist. We're shifting to a trust-based development model where we assume good outcomes and iterate toward excellence. Logan Martinez, our CTO, looked like he was having a stroke. "Preston, we're dealing with federal financial regulations. Assuming good outcomes isn't a development strategy. It's criminal negligence." Preston just smiled that condescending smile and launched into a speech about legacy thinking and resistance to paradigm shifts. He had an answer for everything, and every answer was the same. Anyone who questioned his decisions was stuck in old ways of thinking and needed to embrace change. But the worst part was watching him gaslight anyone who tried to push back. When Ashley Morgan, one of our sharpest junior developers, raised concerns about data encryption standards, Preston told her she was catastrophizing and needed to align her mindset with solution-oriented thinking. When our database administrator pointed out that Preston's schema changes were creating referential integrity violations, Preston suggested maybe it was time to onboard team members who could think outside relational constraints. The kid had learned every manipulation tactic in the corporate playbook. He'd frame technical objections as personal resistance to change, characterize legitimate concerns as negativity that was toxic to team dynamics, and position himself as the visionary leader trying to drag everyone else into the future. I kept my head down and my mouth shut, documented everything, backed up everything, and waited. The breaking point came when Preston decided our platform needed real-time gamification elements to make compliance reporting more engaging for end users. He spent 3 days building what he called an achievement system that awarded points and badges for completing regulatory tasks. The fact that many of these tasks involved handling sensitive financial data and required serious attention to detail apparently didn't matter. What mattered was user engagement and making compliance fun. That's when I realized this wasn't just corporate incompetence anymore. This was professional suicide, and he was taking all of us down with him. 3 weeks before our investor demo, Preston announced he was doing a complete architecture refresh to showcase what he called our next-generation compliance paradigm. He pushed the timeline up by 2 weeks because, according to him, velocity creates momentum, and momentum drives results. The kid had no idea what he was talking about, but he said it with such confidence that people started nodding along. That's the thing about corporate environments. If you speak with enough authority, people assume you know something they don't. He reassigned Ashley Morgan, our UI/UX designer, to work on brand synergy initiatives instead of fixing the user interface bugs we'd been tracking for months. Fired our compliance consultant, a former SEC auditor who actually understood federal regulations, without telling our legal department, and decided he'd run the live demo himself because rehearsals kill authenticity, and we want investors to feel the raw energy of innovation. When I tried to point out that our platform would be handling real financial data during the demonstration, that regulatory authorities would be watching, that one mistake could kill our funding and potentially land people in prison, he just laughed. "You're thinking too much like an engineer, Caleb," he said, using that patronizing tone that made me want to throw him out a window. "This is about vision. About showing them the future, not getting bogged down in technical minutiae. You need to trust the process. Trust the process. The process designed by someone who thought JavaScript and Java were the same programming language and had once asked me why we couldn't just blockchain the database to make it more secure. Meanwhile, I was watching our production environment deteriorate in real time. Preston had given himself administrative access to everything and was making changes like a kid playing with dynamite in a fireworks factory. He'd replaced critical security modules with untested code, removed database constraints that prevented data corruption, disabled our automated backup systems because they were creating unnecessary server overhead. Every morning, I'd check our system logs and find new disasters waiting to happen. Buffer overflow vulnerabilities, memory leaks that would crash the system under heavy load, authentication bypasses that could let anyone access sensitive financial records. It was like watching someone systematically remove every safety feature from a nuclear reactor while insisting they were making improvements. The worst part was that nobody seemed to understand how dangerous this was becoming. Shane Campbell was too busy being proud of his son's innovative thinking to listen to technical concerns. Logan Martinez kept telling people to ride it out and let Preston find his footing. HR sent around motivational emails about embracing change and supporting leadership transitions. 2 weeks before the demo, our staging environment completely collapsed. Preston had been using it to test his gamification enhancements, a system that turned compliance reporting into something that looked like a mobile game, complete with sound effects and animated characters. The database couldn't handle the additional processing load, and the whole thing just died during what should have been a routine user acceptance test. "It's not a big deal," Preston announced to the team. "Staging environments are just crutches anyway. Real innovation happens in production. We're going to demo directly from the live system to show investors we're confident in our platform." Logan Martinez went pale. "Preston, that's insane." If something goes wrong during the demo, we could crash the entire production environment. We'd lose every client, every transaction record, everything. Preston waved him off. That's legacy thinking, Logan. You're catastrophizing instead of embracing the opportunity. This is going to show investors that we're not just another cautious fintech startup. We're revolutionaries. That's when I made my final preparations. I spent that entire weekend creating a comprehensive backup of our last stable build, the version from before Preston started his improvements. I encrypted it with military-grade algorithms, stored it on my shadow server, and created multiple redundant copies across different physical locations. If Preston was determined to burn the house down, I was going to make sure I had the only fire extinguisher. Demo day arrived like a slow-motion disaster movie where you can see the asteroid coming, but nobody believes the scientists trying to warn them. The company had rented out one of those glass-walled conference centers downtown, the kind with too much natural light and not enough cell phone reception. Investors filed in with their tablets and skeptical expressions. People from venture firms, regional banks, and one very serious-looking woman from the SEC who set up her laptop in the back row like she was conducting a criminal investigation. Preston strutted around the room like he was about to unveil the cure for cancer. Hair slicked back with enough product to waterproof a boat, wearing a shirt so tight it was practically a second skin, shaking hands and dropping buzzwords like confetti. He kept talking about paradigm shifts and disruptive innovation frameworks while investors nodded politely and checked their phones. Shane Campbell introduced his son like he was presenting the next Steve Jobs. Preston has revolutionized our approach to compliance technology, he announced to the room with the pride of a parent at a kindergarten graduation. What you're about to see represents a complete paradigm shift in how financial institutions can streamline their regulatory processes. I sat in the back, arms crossed, watching this theater of the absurd unfold. Nobody mentioned that I'd built 90% of the code base they were about to demonstrate. Nobody acknowledged the 6 years of development work that went into creating something that actually functioned. I was just another face in the crowd, watching my life's work get paraded around by someone who couldn't debug a Hello World program without Googling the syntax. Preston stepped up to the presentation screen and launched into what he called his vision narrative. I counted 7 uses of the word synergy in his opening paragraph alone. Behind him, the dashboard came to life. All flashy animations and spinning widgets, numbers tumbling like slot machine reels, real-time statistics that weren't connected to any actual data feeds, compliance reports that were just lorem ipsum text formatted to look official, achievement badges that lit up randomly to create the illusion of user engagement. Ladies and gentlemen, Preston announced, spreading his arms like he was about to take flight, welcome to the future of compliance. Today, we're not just showing you software, we're showing you a revolution in how financial institutions approach regulatory challenges. The room leaned forward. Phones came out to record what they expected would be groundbreaking technology. The SEC representative started taking detailed notes. Preston swiped through various screens showing off features that looked impressive until you realized they were mostly cosmetic. He demonstrated what he called intelligent compliance workflows, basically a series of pop-up windows with encouraging messages and progress bars that didn't track any real progress. He showed off the gamification engine that turned regulatory reporting into something that looked like Candy Crush with financial terminology. But the investors didn't know that. Not yet. And now, Preston said, his voice rising with excitement, I want to show you something we're especially proud of. A feature that demonstrates our commitment to cutting-edge user experience design and operational efficiency. He pointed to a bright red button in the corner of the dashboard labeled Fresh Start. My chest tightened. I knew exactly what that button did because I'd seen the code behind it. In his infinite wisdom, Preston had connected it to a database deletion script that would wipe every trace of our legacy architecture, including the production environment we were currently running the demo on. He'd labeled it as a clean slate optimization tool for users who wanted to refresh their compliance workspace. This innovative control allows administrators to instantly reset their entire compliance environment for optimal performance, Preston explained to the room full of investors. It eliminates legacy data overhead and provides a pristine foundation for next-generation regulatory workflows. The SEC representative looked up sharply. Mr. Campbell, are you saying this button deletes regulatory records? Because that would be a violation of federal data retention requirements. Preston waved dismissively. Oh no, it's much more sophisticated than that. It's a smart refresh that optimizes data architecture while preserving essential compliance elements. Watch this." And he clicked the button. The chime that played was cheerful and optimistic, like a slot machine paying out jackpot. A progress bar appeared on screen, filling slowly as the system processed what Preston thought was a harmless demonstration command. The room stayed perfectly quiet, everyone waiting to see what revolutionary feature they were about to witness. Then the screen went black. Not a stylish fade to black, not a planned transition, just dead, empty, digital void. The dashboard collapsed. The progress indicators vanished. All that remained was a blinking cursor in the top left corner and a growing sense of dread that you could practically taste. Preston stared at the screen like it had personally betrayed him. He tapped the surface, tried clicking his mouse, jabbed at his keyboard. Nothing responded. There's just a small rendering delay," he stammered, sweat beginning to show through his expensive shirt. "Sometimes the graphics take a moment to load when we're running intensive optimization processes." But the screen wasn't rendering anything. It was displaying exactly what Preston had programmed it to display. Nothing. Because his fresh start button had just executed a recursive delete command that wiped our entire production database, including the backup tables, the transaction logs, and the user authentication system. Error messages started cascading across the terminal window like a digital waterfall of failure. Permission denied, file not found, database connection failed, table does not exist. Each line of code was like another nail in Preston's professional coffin. The first investor stood up quietly, packed his briefcase, and walked to the elevator without saying a word. Then another, then three more. By the time Preston stopped clicking frantically at his keyboard, half the room had emptied out. The SEC representative raised her hand. "Mr. Campbell, we appear to be looking at a complete system failure during a live compliance demonstration. This raises serious questions about your platform's stability and your company's technical competence." Shane Campbell's face had gone gray. He looked like a man watching his retirement fund evaporate in real time. "This is just a temporary technical glitch," he said weakly. "We've been pushing some very advanced development boundaries, so occasionally we encounter—" "The production environment is completely down," Logan Martinez interrupted from across the room. He was staring at his laptop screen with the expression of someone watching a plane crash. "Everything's gone. User accounts, transaction logs, audit trails, client data, the entire database has been wiped." The room went silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of elevators carrying investors away from our burning company. That's when Preston turned to me, desperation creeping into his voice like water through a cracked dam. "Caleb, you have backups, right? You always keep backups of everything. You can fix this." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled. "I haven't had access to the production systems in 3 weeks," I said clearly, loud enough for everyone remaining to hear. "You revoked my permissions, remember? Said I was part of the old guard that was holding back innovation. The silence that followed was the kind you hear right before thunder. But," I continued, standing up slowly, "there might be something we can do." I pulled out my phone and opened a secure app. A green indicator pulsed on the screen, my shadow system, running perfectly, completely isolated from Preston's digital demolition. "I maintained an independent compliance environment during the beta testing phase," I explained to the room. "Complete backup of our stable build, updated nightly, fully separate from the main production stack." Shane Campbell looked like he'd just found water in the desert. "Can you restore it? Can you get us back online?" "We'll restore all your access, put you back in charge of everything." I looked around the room at the remaining investors, at Logan, who was slowly nodding with recognition, and something that looked like relief, at Preston, who had gone pale as printer paper. "I can," I said simply, "but not for free." 6 months later, Secure Flow Financial had not only recovered but thrived under our new technical leadership structure. My consulting contract paid triple my previous salary, plus equity compensation that made the whole nightmare worth enduring. Preston had quietly left the company to pursue other opportunities in what I heard was a marketing role at one of his father's golf buddies' companies. The platform I rebuilt was better than ever, and our Series B funding closed successfully with investors who specifically praised our disaster recovery capabilities and technical resilience. Turns out there's enormous market value in having systems that actually work when it matters. As for me, I kept getting calls from other fintech companies dealing with similar problems. Word had spread through the industry about the engineer who'd saved Secure Flow from complete collapse. Suddenly, experience and competence were back in fashion. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's being prepared.